Welcome back to another edition of Knight Rider, where we slow down, talk about stuff. If you are new to this part, this is where we take a long time, or at least try to. I try to slow down. Generally, I feel like I'm a fast talker, but I try to slow down in this one. We try to take a little bit longer, think some more, ponder, linger. There's something to be said about living slowly, right? And not being hasty in your steps. There's certainly a time for speed. And if you're like me, your propensity is to just kind of move on to the next thing and keep going. But I think it's really important to slow down from time to time and think, For a lot of you, it's probably in the shower, right? You have like good shower thoughts. It's because it's like one of the only places where you actually just have to like be with yourself. When I smoke cigars, I get kind of philosophical. It's too cold out right now, otherwise I'd be smoking a cigar as we have this conversation, but alas, it's the weather. So if you can hear my heater in the background, I apologize. The weather has been super schizophrenic, and today is just a cold day. So, I've been thinking a lot about the medieval mindset. The medieval mindset. I'm going to call it that. I'm sure someone else has used that phrase before. I'm not sure what they mean. We'll get to what I mean. But it's a couple things, right? Like, unless you've been living under a rock for the past year, you understand that the world's an interesting place right now. I guess primarily what I mean here is that we elected President Trump to do a thing. He's since betrayed the people who voted for him, myself included, on just about every single major issue that he promised. I'm not, maybe there was like one or two that he delivered on. I guess I don't know anymore at this point. Honestly, I don't even know if I care. Because everything else is such a colossal betrayal that it's comical. You have to laugh so you don't cry kind of deal, right? So you're probably well aware of this, but just in case you're not, somehow, let's recap the facts real quick here. So we're at war with Iran, which we didn't have to be because we destroyed their nukes, but they were going to get nukes, and the war was over, and we won, but now it's going to be a couple weeks, and now the Pentagon needs $200 billion, but it's over, and now it's winding down, on and on we go. Joe Kent, who's the former director of the National Terrorist Center or something like that, essentially like the national center that is against terrorism. I didn't even know we had this organization, to be fully honest with you. And he resigned, saying that it was very clear that Israel dragged us into this war, which is just about evident for anyone who's paying the slightest bit of attention at this point. So we got the war with Iran. We're not getting any deportations. Every time things get tough, like in Minneapolis, Trump quits the field and runs. Then he backed down and said, we don't need to deport. We got a lot of good people here. We don't need to deport those people. We just need to get the criminals out. I think Matt Walsh summarized it best, where it was like, the reality that they're asking you to believe is that we can go in overnight and capture the president of Venezuela, but we can't deport a single illegal immigrant. I think that's a very good summarization, right? Nothing, they can't even get the SAVE Act passed in Congress to like regulate elections and make sure that, they're just and real. I don't know who still believes in elections anymore, but if you do, you probably should stop. They can't, the Republicans, just like last time, have had control of the House and the Senate and the White House. And what have they accomplished? Which of the things that you voted for have happened? Oh, well, Dylan, you don't understand. Like, there's the exigencies. I think that's the right word. Exigencies means like difficulties of rule. I don't know how to pronounce that word. I've only read it. You don't understand how all the intricacies and the different things at play in the parliamentary procedure and how hard it is to get a law passed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But truthfully, even if I don't understand them, let's just say you're right. Let's say I don't understand. I don't care. Right? Like, when has the government ever delivered on a promise to me? A positive promise. They deliver on negative promises all the time. But my entire life, when has the government ever sought to actually seek my good or my welfare or benefit me? I'm not sure when that was exactly. So, anyways, here we are. This is the state of things that we find ourselves in. We elected the one guy who was going to fix it, right? The commies tried to kill him. He was already elected once. Then they, just spent 4 years maligning him. They charged him with all these felonies. They convicted him of stuff, etc., 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 etc. This guy, surely he's going to get it. He's going to come in there like a wrecking ball. Things started out good. He appointed a bunch of people who we thought were reformers. We had Kash Patel in the FBI. We all know how that's gone. We had Pete Hegseth in charge of the Secretary of Defense, now the Secretary of War, the Department of War, but we're not at war with Iran, just in case you're confused. With all these people that got put in these spots, and things were looking decent. Yeah, Pam Bondi sucks. We knew that from the beginning. But, overall, things are looking pretty good. And a year later, here we are. Right? Charlie Kirk gets murdered. One of the president's advisors, a guy who helped form the current government, one of the most influential conservative figures in America, gets brutally, publicly murdered. And there's no real due diligence. There's no real follow-through. Just came out now that the rifle that allegedly the shooter used to shoot Charlie Kirk, the bullet doesn't match the rifling on that rifle. So, it just gets worse and worse, right? It gets worse and worse. We've talked extensively about the death of Charlie Kirk on this Knight Rider series thing, so we're not going to rehash that. But this is the world we find ourselves in. Tumultuous, changing, fading central power. I think that as things go on, the federal government will have less and less influence, reach, power. You see it in places, and Minneapolis is a perfect example. ICE agents went in there to get the illegals. The people in Minneapolis protested extremely rabidly, right? They had these 1,000-member signal chats with people committing open felonies. No one's ever been charged. You have people storming into this church, City's Church in Minneapolis. I used to be a member at that church, actually. Doing all these crazy things. No one goes to jail. No one gets in trouble. No one gets charged. Instead, ICE just leaves. Oh, mission accomplished. We're closing up operations here, and they leave. So what's the lesson that teaches you? Well, the lesson that you should be taking from that is, if you resist the federal government long enough and in the correct format and with enough fervent ardor, they'll leave. That's the precedent that has been set. So, what do you think that's going to mean going forward, right? I learned the other day that collectively, the people who work for the IRS, owe something like $50 million in back taxes. $50 million from the employees of the IRS. You have to pay your taxes, but they don't. I bring that up to just say, like, the federal government is going to continue to crumple under the weight of its own corruption, under the weight of its own incompetence, under the weight of just, they'll be less and less relevant. And I think that's kind of the way it's going to continue to go for the rest of my life. I could be wrong. Time will tell. But I think that they'll just kind of fade away. Now, we call that a power vacuum, right? So, as they fade away, what does that mean? What does that mean for me? What does it mean for you? And I think that's where I keep coming back to this, what I'm going to call the medieval mindset. I have been reading Two Swords of Christ by Raymond Ebram. I'm almost done. It's a thick book. It's like 450 pages. And honestly, I can't read too much in one sitting because it can be emotionally heavy. When you read about the sacks of these cities and these brutal sieges and the aftermath with the rape and the murder and the pillaging and the child sex slavery and the homosexual sex slavery and the whole deal, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. So I only can read a couple chapters at a time before I need to like put the book down and take a breath. And remember that Jesus is still in control. But anyways, I've been reading this book, and it follows the two major military orders, the Knights Templar and the Knights Hospitaller, and just kind of their general history. And I just got done reading about the two sieges of Rhodes. Long story short, the Knights Hospitaller end up with their home base in Rhodes, and the Muslims come to put siege to them and completely destroy them twice. Twice are unable to accomplish it when, by all accounts, the city should have been just crumpled like a tin can, right? But due to a variety of acts of bravery and commitment, and et cetera, the Knights do not crumple like a tin can and fight extremely valiantly. I'm not doing it justice by a mile. You should really read the book, but it's very, very inspiring. And at that time, the Knights Hospitaller were essentially an independent, kind of an independent state almost. They were this military order that was founded under the authority of the Pope. But then they kind of acquired their own city and their own island at Rhodes. And later they acquired the island of Malta, which is where I'm at right now. So I don't really know too much after that timeline or what happens here. I'm sure there's some more sieges involved, because that seems to be the order of the day. But they kind of operate as their own independent state. I don't know if you remember what you learned about the feudal system as a kid. But what you probably learned, what I learned, right, was how terrible it was and how awful it was. And, we are much more enlightened now with representative democracy and so forth. But essentially, under the feudal system, you have a king who's at the top of the chain here, and he has different lords, barons, dukes, depending on what time period and what country you're in, they're called different things, okay? But essentially, they are lords, and they rule over their estates and their lands, however big that is. They're counties. The counties, it's a British term, by the way. That's where we get that from. So is sheriff. But anyways, they rule over their sections of land, okay? And then on their sections of land, you have serfs, or the people, who rent the land from the Lord to work it and keep it, right? So they rent the land, and then as payment for the rent, they're giving back 10, 20% of their crops or whatever that they're using the land for back to the Lord. And then when it comes time to fight, and there's conscription and stuff, the Lord calls these people to fight with him. He takes his guys, he goes and joins with the king calls all his lords with all their people. And that's how this whole system is built. Worked out for quite a while. And, obviously there were extreme abuses of power. There will always be abuses of power in any system. You can look at our system right now, and you can see how rabidly abused it is, right? But by and large, the thing I like about it is that on paper, in theory, and in practice, I would argue, the interests of the Lord and ultimately the king are aligned with the interests of the people. Here's what I mean. If you have to call these people to fight for you and with you, how should you treat them? If I am a jerk to you, generally disrespectful and distasteful and etc., and then one day I show up and I say, you have to come fight for me, I could probably maybe threaten you with violence. If you don't, we're going to kill you, we're going to dispossess you. Again, I'm sure these things happened. And maybe you'll come fight for me. Maybe you'll try to kill me. Maybe you'll betray me to the other guys. A lot of maybes in that scenario. So I would argue it would be in my best interest to ensure that we have a working relationship, right? Did that always happen? No, of course not, obviously. Never happens anywhere, all the time. But right now, the interests of our government are opposed to your personal interests. Well, is your gas prices going up? Too bad, sucks, doesn't matter. Well, are your taxes going up? Does your health care cost more? Well, your health care might cost more, but me, the senator who voted to increase your health care costs, I actually have a separate health care plan that I voted on that's different from yours, so I'm fine. That's a real thing, by the way. Right, like the people in Washington and government live completely separate from you and me. Their interests are not aligned with our interests. Their interests are to loot the treasury as much as is humanly possible. Who pays for the treasury? You and me. Who gets the benefits and the money and the goods? Them. And all the foreigners that they decide to give all the tax credits away to. Right? So the interests are opposed. If you look at ancient Rome, for example, again, the interests of the elite are aligned with the interests of the people. In Rome, when they voted to go to war, guess who goes first? All the senators, all the leaders, all the praetors, right? That's who goes. In Rome, a military and political career were the same thing. They weren't separate. Now, the Romans were notorious. Some would accuse them of warmongering. Some would accuse them of constant self-defense. Whatever. Point is they were always at war. Okay? Almost always. So you could say, well, that didn't work to limit war. And that'd be a fair critique. But my point is that when the Romans lost a catastrophic battle, the field was littered with the elite. Right? The Roman senators died in combat. They voted to go and they went themselves. Same thing with the Spartans or the Athenians or most of these ancient cultures, right? Who leads? The king leads. The lords lead. They might not be in combat, but they might be a couple ranks behind the front, 40 feet from the actual sword-to-sword contact here. Caesar fought on the front a lot. Alexander the Great spent his whole life fighting on the front line, leading cavalry charges. So, long-standing human tradition of leaders fighting from the front. But we don't have that, right? So we don't, again, the interests of the current elite and people who run the country are not aligned with my interests or your interests. My interests or your interests count for little in their eyes, only what they can gain from the system, which is the one that I pay for, right? With 40-50% of my taxes. Taxes under a feudal system, by the way, far less than you're paying today. I promise you that. I don't know all the numbers on that. Someone can fact check me on that, but considerably less. So, a medieval mindset. What does that mean? Again, when I think about the feudal system in general, this was built at a time when the world was tumultuous. You have Viking raids popping up all over the place, right? From like 800, maybe 1100, 1050, something like that. Probably a little later than 1050. But for hundreds of years is my point. You have Viking raids, just randomly a long ship full of, 40, 50 guys apiece, maybe 2-3 long ships, all of a sudden appear on the horizon. Bunch of guys hop out and start looting, raping, and pillaging everything. And just all up and down the English coast, into France. They made it all the way into the Mediterranean. Okay? Huge thing. All of a sudden there's just these random guys looting and attacking, pillaging and raping, hauling people off to slavery. Big deal. Big problem. What are you going to do about that? On top of that, you have other kingdoms that are scheming and at war with each other and at war with you. You don't have a high literacy rate. Not a lot of people can read and write. Information travels slower. A lot of people are just subsistence agrarian farming. Subsistence farming, agrarian lifestyle, Not a lot of industrialization for obvious reasons. That's why they call it the Dark Ages. Misnomer, different video. But this is the time. It's a time full of tumultuousness. The only reason we end up getting a lot of the Greek histories and works saved, like Socrates' Apology, I don't know if that one was specific, but a lot of these saved is because monks copied them down in monasteries, right? They lived in monasteries and they spent a lot of their time copying works down. And that's how a lot of those survived that time. One of the only places of literacy, monasteries. So super tumultuous time. And as I've been reading the Two Swords of Christ, and I've been thinking about the time we live in, and I've been reflecting on the feudal system in general, here's what I mean by medieval mindset. I think there are three, I'm going to call them pillars, 3 pillars. Local commanders, local camaraderie, and local commerce. Commanders, camaraderie, commerce. Commanders, camaraderie, commerce. Commanders. So in the feudal system, right, you had a lord who ruled over the local area. Now that might be like 20, 40, 50, I don't know, maybe 100 square miles, right? But it's a semi-local area. And everyone knows who the lord is. And he's in charge of the area. And he has some authority in his dominion in this region. And I think having a medieval mindset, to me, partly means having local, trustable leaders whose interests are vested in the people's interest. That might be like an official elected position, like a mayor, or a governor even. It might mean something more informal, like the leader of your Minuteman team, or it might be something in between. I don't know. But having local leaders whose interests and influence is aligned with your interests is a big deal. And by your interests here, we obviously mean the preservation of your way of life, not dying, not allowing invasion of foreign hordes to take your stuff, right? Not allowing the boot of tyranny to crush you into dust. That's what we mean. So we want to have leaders. We want to be leaders. We want to find leaders whose interests are aligned with the good of the people and whose interests are not contrary to the good of the people, as is the case with so many leaders in far off Washington or the federal government and all the bureaucrats, the tens of thousands, I get millions really, of bureaucratic officials. Oh my gosh, my phone's blowing up here. Hold on. Let me turn this off here. Sorry. I had to silence my phone there. The millions of bureaucrats whose interests are not aligned with your interests, right? Their interests are getting their paychecks or making their money, again, looting the system. We've talked about that. The decline of empires, there's always a mad rush for the treasury. Just always, any history you read is going to tell you that. So, local commanders whose interests are vested in your interests. And I guess maybe this should also be a fourth pillar. I didn't think about this till right now, but there also needs to be like a commitment to a higher purpose in there, right? We'll come back to that. I need to think of a good C for a higher purpose so we can keep the alliteration going. Maybe local cosmology, cosmic. I don't know. I'm spitballing here. I didn't think about this till right now. Okay, sue me. I'll refine it. Anyways, local commanders, local camaraderie. Here I mean like your Minuteman team, right? Every lord had a retinue of knights. Maybe it was like 3 or 5. Maybe it was a couple dozen. Maybe they were really big and they had like 30, But they had a retinue. They had a retinue of knights. Some guys who fought with them and trained with them, who the Lord paid for full time to have ready at arms, provided them with horses. Each knight needed to have like 3 horses. One for like travel, one for baggage, and one for fighting. And, full set of plate mail. Well, in the later ages, plate mail, but, armor isn't cheap. Weapons aren't cheap. Like, none of this stuff is cheap, okay? So, they paid for all these things for these guys, and they had this private military force. They had their house knights, right? Important. But they had fighters who were willing to fight for their lord, for the people. Again, many bad knights in the world. Many bad lords. I'm not by no means saying it was a perfect system. I'm just saying, generally, the interests of the elite are aligned more so than currently in our system with the interests of the people. Because again, the knights are going to go to war, but again, there's maybe a dozen of them. Maybe if they're really big, there's like 3 or 4 dozen. 4 dozen. Okay? That's a lot of knights. But you need a bunch of people. You need support staff. You need baggage trains. You need just more fighters. Like, you just need a lot, right? You need bowmen, So you have to have local camaraderie. I think this is a Minuteman channel, right? I've written a couple books on being a Minuteman and Minuteman tactics and all the cool stuff. It's on the website if you don't know that. But so I'm all in on the Minuteman thing. That's fairly obvious. But I think that's an important piece. It's not all of it, but it's an important piece of the medieval mindset. Local camaraderie. You have a group of men that you know and that you trust and that you train with and that you fight with and that you work with, so that if the time ever comes, you know who you're calling. You want as many friends as you can have, but you want quality over quantity. There might be people who want to be a part of your Minuteman team that you have to say no to. I've had to do that. It happens. It just doesn't work out, whatever. But by and large, we want as many friends as we can have. We want quality. And then the third part is commerce. Local commerce. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean, like, one of my texts that I had to turn my phone off for here was that our egg guy dropped off eggs. Right? I have a guy, every week he brings eggs to my house and I pay him money. Right? We also get our raw milk local, because once you go raw milk, by the way, you'll never go back. But I try to get as much of my food sources local as I can. I mean, one, that's just like a good general strategy. Like, I'm less influenced by global supply trains and global supply networks. And if there's a huge fire in an egg factory in Kentucky, it doesn't necessarily affect me. Still can, right? But my point is, well, I get my eggs from the guy down the street, so I'm good, right? I get my milk from a guy in town, so no matter what, the milk's going to keep running. Now, they might be relying on other global supply networks, right? Well, they didn't have enough feed for the chickens or the cows or whatever. Like, those could happen. So again, it's not impervious, but the better I can be linked, particularly with food to me, to my local economy, my local commerce, the better off I'm going to be. The more insulated I am from fluctuations in global machinations of giant corporations doing things. Again, still possible. BlackRock's been buying up a ton of single-family homes. It's a real problem. Different video. My point is that as we can be more tied into the local economy, we're more insulated and we're more independent from the huge global levers that they like to pull. And if you have those three things, the fourth one, let's come back to this. A grand unifying vision here, right? A belief and a commitment to something bigger than yourself. Bigger than your city for historical purposes. This is Jesus, right? Again, you read all of these Two Swords of Christ books or the Defenders of the West book, and these guys are fighting a religious war and they know it. They say, we are not Islam, we're not Muslims, we are Christians, and we'll fight and die as Christians, full stop. Big deal. But they had a belief in something that was greater than themselves. They believed in something that would outlive them, outlast them, was more important than their life. And if you have those things, you have a belief in something bigger than you, more important than you, that's worth your life. You have a bunch of boys, camaraderie, team of guys that believes that too. You have a local leader that believes that's vested in your interests. And you have a local commerce. Well, you've built yourself a nice little citadel there, haven't you? Built yourself a nice little castle. Both perhaps physical, but more than likely in this case we mean metaphorical, right? You've built yourself, you're much more resilient in this medieval mindset structure that you've built than if you didn't have that. Than if, Amazon just fires 10,000 people tomorrow and replaces them with AI and you worked from Amazon and so now you're out of a job. It sucks. So as much as you can be, and again, I don't know if this is wholly possible, so I'm not saying like this is a hard and fast rule, but I'm saying as much as you can lean this way and embrace the medieval mindset, I really do believe that's what would get us through this the most effectively. The monasteries survived the Middle Ages. Now, we can say there's a lot of problems with the monasteries and whatever, and those are valid concerns, and I have some of them. But my point is that they preserved written works for future generations. They preserved a place of stability for future generations, right? They were a little bit of an anchor in a very tumultuous world because they were independent. They had the monastery, they had the local monks, they made their own food, they made their own beer, maybe did some local trading, did a lot of writing and praying. But by and large, we're pretty stable in comparison to the rest of the world at that time. And so I think it's important to think like that, to look back in history and say, when were other really screwed up, tumultuous times here, and how did people make it, or did they? And I think this is a model we can build on. I don't think it's foolproof. I don't think it's fully rounded out. I don't think it's complete. But I think leaning that way and thinking thinking in a medieval mindset, and thinking in a way of how can I build local commanders and commerce and camaraderie and cosmic views. How can I build all of those things in my local place? This is where, if you know Jesus, which you should, repent if you don't, and you go to a good church, it can be a real big step in the right direction here. I thought about that a lot under the Biden years, about having like a local economy and community that was less touchable by Biden and company, who want to get you fired for not getting an experimental vaccine injected in your arm, right? A vaccine, by the way, that Trump gave us. I noticed he stopped bragging about that, which is great. But again, what has Trump done for us? So think medieval. Think about trying to build these local networks. I'm in a chat, for example, with some other YouTubers, and we chat about different YouTube stuff and guns and whatever. And I got invited there by one of the other YouTuber guys, which is really gracious of them, and I'm happy to be in the chat. If any of them watch this, I like you guys. But none of those guys are local to me, right? I don't know them. I've never met any of them in person, right? I watch some of their channels. They're guys that we chat about in a chat. They've been helpful to me in giving me advice on videos or shooting or whatever. But I'm not calling them at 2 a.m., right? They're not my local camaraderie. They're fun internet friends, and I appreciate that. And I'm not there. I physically am not available to help them if I wanted, right? And they would all say the same, I think. I don't think any of them would be offended to hear that. I hope not. It's just reality. And I think that they would acknowledge that and also say, yeah, well, Dylan's right. We need local camaraderie. Have your local camaraderie. Find or be your local commander. Do what you can to build local commerce. Surely there's some farmer within a reasonable distance of you that would love to just sell you his milk direct, right? When I was in Minnesota, we had these things called CSAs, Community Shared Agriculture, and you could like buy a share of this farm, and every week you would get, in the summer, you get a box of different vegetables, you know? Often way too much kale. I'm not a big kale fan. But my point is I'm invested in that local farm, right? And I know that every week I'm going to get my batch of vegetables from that farm, right? Because I've paid my share, and et cetera, et cetera. So what can you do to continue to build those connections so that you become more resilient? Think on it. We're going to need you. I'll look for you on the field. Do brave deeds and endure.